You may not realize that we're living through an urgent leadership crisis right now. The leadership pipeline is collapsing, and leaders really need to wake up before it's too late because the leadership bench is empty, and Gen Z is now exposing this. Recent studies find that the current generation entering the workforce, which is Gen Z, isn't producing very many leaders. Other studies reveal that the Gen Z leaders who are entering the workforce just feel kind of lost. They're not being given the adequate coaching needed to lead effectively and confidently. I came across one recent study that found that 83% of Gen Z feel unprepared for the workforce. So it just looks like we failed to develop Gen Z, and now we're expecting them to lead. Okay, that's not how this thing works. We can do better than that. We need to dig into some old-fashioned leadership development. And that's what this episode is all about, because we don't have a Gen Z problem, we have a leadership development problem. I say this with a lot of confidence because I lead a team primarily made up of Gen Z. So I'm not an educational guru, I'm just a practitioner serving fellow soldiers in the trenches. The stuff we're gonna talk about today is the playbook that I built for the people I lead, and it's worked for us. Imagine for a moment if leadership development could be simple. I mean, what if instead of new leaders feeling lost and lonely and unprepared, they could feel confident and empowered and capable? That's been our experience so far. Look, I know what it's like to feel lost and unprepared as a leader. My first leadership role was when I was 18 years old, and I led teams of people who were much older and more experienced than I was. And I had issues and conflicts that I had no idea how to handle. And I had to get up on stage and address hundreds, sometimes thousands of people without a whole lot of experience. And I made all sorts of mistakes. It was so intimidating. It was so confusing at times. And maybe that's how you're feeling right now. Whether you're Gen Z experiencing that firsthand, or maybe you're an experienced leader wondering how to invest in Gen Z, this is urgent. Whether it's skills like delegation or conflict management or decision-making or giving and receiving feedback or communication, leadership demands a lot of learned skills. And sometimes you just need leaders who are a little bit ahead of you to help you walk through those challenges. So today I'm going to give you a 4-stage leadership development framework that I built from my own experience, and I built it specifically for my team. And hopefully this is going to give you the tools that you need to develop yourself or your team into a strong, confident, and capable group of leaders. I've experienced 3 of the 4 stages we're going to look at today, and I'm currently working on the 4th stage. Jury's out on whether I'll actually achieve the 4th stage. We'll see. It's going to take quite a long time. But no matter what stage of leadership you're in the right place if you're serious about leadership growth. Well, if you're new to the community, I want to say a big welcome. I'm Zach. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4. I'm a pastor. I lead a team called Met Creative. And I also host this leadership community. After I finished grad school, I found that I really wanted to devote my energy to being a student of leadership, which is one of the reasons I started this community. It's been so fun getting this off the ground, and I love serving amazing people like you each and every week. I'm also learning so much from all of you. Whenever you comment and share your thoughts or your experience, I read those and it really helps me. And I just want to thank you for doing that. I want to shout out one subscriber. They commented that management makes or breaks a workplace. And I used to hate working, but where I'm at now completely flipped that. And it's 100% because of my manager. Thank you for that reminder of why leadership matters so much. That's great. Shout out to Beck, or maybe it's short for Rebecca, maybe. She commented on our episode about the compound effect and how it applies to leadership. She said, I needed to hear this today. I've been losing momentum. As long as I'm still showing up and taking those steps every day, I'm still moving towards my goal and making progress. Thank you for this reminder. Hey, thank you, Beck, for sharing your story with us. We love it. It's so fun. Keep sharing your stories, and feel free to ask any questions you have or make any suggestions for topics you'd like covered in future episodes. We're only a handful of months into this thing, but it's already so encouraging to see you guys tuning in and being the first early supporters of this growing community. Let me tell you what we do here if you're new. Every week I release new research-driven content designed to serve leaders like you who want to grow, thrive, and last in leadership. And our motto around here is to keep fighting the good fight. And that's because leadership is hard. And hopefully by tuning in each week, this community gives you the tools and the motivation and the community that you need to keep fighting that good fight week after week. As always, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know you're busy, which is why I try to pack as much value as I can into each and every episode. So with that said, let's get into today's content. I've created a leadership development workbook to accompany this episode. It's got all the information, it's got resource recommendations, it's got note-taking sections, and that's going to really support what we're going to discuss today. So feel free to pause this video and download that. You can find it in the description below. If you're driving via podcast, maybe don't do this, but it'll definitely give you the most value from our time together. If you can print it out, that's even better. It's also a great tool to put in the hands of your team for leadership development. I've given this to my team. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 stages in this leadership development framework. As we go through them, I want you to identify which stage you're in and let me know in the comments once you figure it out. But keep in mind, each stage is a never-ending process, meaning once you enter that stage, you never stop. Each stage builds on the previous stage. And by the end, you're doing all 4 stages simultaneously. In other words, you're a 4-stage leader. So let me know in the comments what stage you're at in your leadership journey and what your experience is in that current stage. I'm really curious. This is a community after all. We want to hear from you. All right, let's look at the first stage. Stage 1 is self-leadership. Without question, every leader's journey is going to start with some kind of personal formation. And I like to refer to this first stage as self-leadership. To lead others, you have to learn how to lead yourself first. That's a pretty common leadership principle. Now, what does that even mean? Well, we're talking about things like self-discipline, mindset, worldview, habit formation, even things like purpose and character. If you're a person of faith like me, then you'd be looking at things like calling and spiritual formation. Now, keep in mind that this first stage is already pretty rare. I mean, most people, unfortunately, go through life without taking personal formation seriously. Or if they do, it's just not very deep or thorough. But not leaders. Every leader has to go through this process. Let me give you 3 principles that really embody what this stage looks like. The first one is a hunger for learning. The second one is a humility to follow. And the third one is a passionate pursuit. Let me break these down. First, a hunger for learning. I've never known a leader who didn't have a love and hunger for learning in some way. It could be reading, could be researching, it could be seminars or conferences, whatever it is, there's a hunger there. So if you haven't developed that yet, something needs to give. Either you haven't found what you're passionate about, or you associate learning with some sort of negative academia thing. You know, maybe you coming out of high school or college, you're just sick of being told what to learn and do and assignments, and I get that. Or you just genuinely have a laziness issue and you need to address that. Because here's the thing, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's zero opportunity for laziness in leadership. You can't be lazy and be a leader. You know, I'm still your friend no matter what, but I can't help you if you're unwilling to cultivate a strong work ethic. You really need that to develop a hunger for learning, and you need that hunger for learning in order to be unleashed as a leader. Now, if that's interesting to you, but you just don't know where to start, download the Leadership Development Workbook, and then you'll see a list of book recommendations there in this first stage of self-leadership. It's like that is your starting line. These are books that I compiled that opened my eyes to the world of leadership and really sparked this ongoing hunger for learning. You know, I get that a lot of people just need to know where to start, and then they can take the ball and run with it. And that's why I made this. This is your starting line. This is where your leadership journey begins. Just work through the list, and I think you'll be so pleased with the results. Now, in this first stage, you can't just have a hunger for learning. You also have to have the humility to follow and to submit to other leadership. And this is big. I can't even begin to tell you how crucial this is. I remember when I was 18 and I was really just kind of starting off my leadership journey, and I was leading a team of adults performing at a pretty high level, but I was also part of this youth team performing at an amateur level where someone else was in charge. It was a very unique situation, and I often found it very frustrating and confusing. But I remember at one point I was expressing my frustration to my father and how I just felt like, you know, the leadership of the youth team wasn't very good, and how I felt like I could do it better with all that I was learning from my current leadership experience with adults and blah, blah, blah. It was that like event session. And I remember my father delivered some of the best advice that I needed to hear. He said, "Son, that may be true, but this is an opportunity for you to practice humility. You can't lead until you learn how to follow. And this experience of submitting to other leadership, it's going to make you a better leader in the long run." So, you know, he said, I would just be humble and just support the team from your current position, be a cheerleader, and do so with a good attitude. You know, that was such great advice. That's exactly what that 18-year-old version of myself needed to hear at that time. My frustration might have been real, it might have been valid, but I still had an opportunity to develop humility. And I don't care how experienced you are as a leader, the best leaders prioritize humility. Humility is also what fuels your hunger for learning. The more you come to know, the more you start to realize how much you don't know. Then lastly, in stage 1, we have to look at the final principle, which is the passionate pursuit. Stage 1 can't be aimless. You've got to have a target on the wall, and it can't be a moving target. It's kind of like that old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to take you there. A lot of people operate that way, but not leaders. Leaders are locked into a compass. They know where true north is. And that's what this passionate pursuit is all about. This is what Simon Sinek would call the why. You need to find what you're passionate about and then pursue it with all out intensity. And it can't be vague. It needs to be specific and measurable and meaningful. You need to find something that you can genuinely give your life to. Personally, I'm so thankful that I found mine at 18. It was either going to be going into the Navy SEALs or it was going to be going into ministry. And I remember there was a summer where I was doing all the SEALs prep. I was doing a program that one of my buddies gave me. And I was thinking about that. I was researching that. And I got in the best shape of my life. But throughout that whole summer, I just couldn't shake this reality that God was calling me into ministry. And so that's what I did. And I didn't have all the answers, but I knew what to passionately pursue with my life. It was just clear. And you don't need 100% clarity about every little thing, but you do need to follow a compass and know where true north is. And that might take some work, but you can't skip it. You've got to put in the work. Now, here's the cool thing. If you take stage 1 seriously, like you really put in the work, then you're already doing what the vast majority of people never do. People will look at you and see someone who's hungry and chomping at the bit and locked in and humble and growing like crazy. In other words, people are going to notice you. They're going to admire your growth. They're going to admire your resolve and your passion, and you're going to start building influence. And that's when we're ready to enter stage 2. Stage 2 is when you go from self-leadership to leading others. And this is where your work in stage 1 starts to positively impact others around you. People will start to notice what you've developed on a personal level, which will establish your influence and credibility at the leadership level. Because leadership, after all, is influence. And the challenge now is to learn how to effectively deal with people, how to effectively apply that influence to serve people. Again, if you're following along in the workbook, you'll notice a different type of recommended resource in this stage. These resources focus on understanding how people are wired and how they're motivated and how they think and how to communicate to them strategically. There are some books, but there are also some assessments that you can experiment with. This stage is still very much about developing yourself as a leader. We haven't stopped that, right? Stage 1 is still happening. But it's in the context of learning how your leadership affects others. In other words, this stage is where you're learning and practicing skills like empathy or communication or conflict resolution and so much more. And this can be a significant learning curve for some people. This stage might have been one of the hardest for me personally. For instance, I'm naturally a very non-empathetic person. I'm more of a suck it up, buttercup kind of guy. I can find myself just charging full steam ahead while completely forgetting and neglecting people's emotions or limitations. And, trust me, I had to learn these skills the hard way. But that's what this stage is for. You're learning how to deal with people. You're learning emotional skills and social awareness. You're learning how to be street smart. You're also learning how the world doesn't revolve around you. Everyone is so unique, and a leader's job is to recognize each individual's intrinsic uniqueness and meet them where they're at. I mean, you can tell an amateur leader from an experienced leader by how they view and treat people. I think it was John Maxwell who said something along the lines of, the moment you stop loving people is the moment you should stop leading people. And that is so true. Stage 2 is powerful. So dive into the resource list I've given you. It's full of helpful tools to get you started. You can do amazing things in stage 2. In fact, a lot of leaders get to stage 2 and they never leave. And that's okay. Stage 2 leaders are critical, but there's a third stage of leadership that we need to talk about that a very select number of leaders enter into. Stage 3 is organizational leadership. This stage is where you transition from leading individuals and you learn the skills needed to lead teams and businesses and organizations. In other words, you go from micro leadership to macro leadership. And this is where we focus on developing things like culture or scaling or organizational structure, organizational systems, and so much more. It's also the stage where you usually have to relearn or upgrade certain skills that you've developed in stage 1 and 2, like delegation and communication. You got to kind of relearn how to do that. You got to carve a little deeper into those. You also just kind of have to rethink what being effective looks like for you, because the level that you used to operate on is not going to be viable for this new stage. This is why each leadership stage is never ending. With each stage comes an entirely new learning curve. The stakes are usually much higher at this third stage. You're usually leading a much bigger entity. You're dealing with bigger numbers. You're dealing with bigger initiatives. And a lot of leaders struggle to find their footing in this stage. They might have had a vision for individual leadership, but they can't seem to catch this vision for this new macro leadership. Sometimes the hardest part is letting go of what you loved about micro leadership. And this is a transition I'm really living in right now. For instance, over the last few years, I guess, I've had to let go of some things that I really enjoyed. And I miss them, But I knew that if I never let go of those tasks, I wouldn't be able to embrace this third stage of leadership. Sometimes this third stage also requires us to let go of that early startup mindset, right? Kind of mom and pop, as you might say. And you have to embrace a bigger vision for a larger organization. And that can be hard as well. Maybe you led a team of 3 to 4 and now you're leading a team of 8 to 10. Or maybe you led 8 to 10 and now you're leading 100. It changes things. Not only does that require a lot of new skills, but it also requires a lot of personal sacrifice. And a lot of uncomfortable change. And this stage of leadership can look very different depending on your sector, depending on the scope of your industry or the size of your organization. I've included some really great resources in the leadership development workbook that can help you navigate this stage of leadership. Again, if you're in this stage, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about your experience and what you're learning, what you're reading. I think there are a lot of people who want to get into this stage, and I think they'd really benefit from what you have to share. So I hope that you do that. Now, a lot of people get to this third stage and they think, that's it, they've arrived. But there's a fourth stage. And this is the stage that only a razor-thin margin of leaders will ever achieve. It takes the best of the best to get to this last stage. You ready for it? Stage 4 is multi-generational leadership. Stage 4 is all about legacy. It's about leading in such a way that your leadership influence continues to live on even after you're gone. You lead beyond your own generation. The history books are obviously rich with stage 4 leaders, but think about how rare it is for a minute. Take US history alone. About 600 million people have lived and died in the US since 1776, the year the United States was born. Okay, how many of those 600 million do you read about in the history books? How many of them had a great enough impact and influence in the world that they were forever remembered? How many of them built something that lasted multiple generations? In other words, how many of them became stage 4 leaders? Very few. Now, as a Christian, I don't believe that your worth as a leader is tied to whether you're written about in the history books or make the newspaper, nothing like that. Leadership is not about headlines. It's about meaningful impact. That comes in all shapes and sizes. Some of the best leaders on the planet might have never been written about, but I don't think that you can be a stage 4 leader without leaving some kind of meaningful legacy behind. For instance, my grandfather turned 90 recently, and he's never been written about in a history book. I don't think he's ever been in the newspaper. He didn't have some iconic job. He honestly lived a pretty normal life, but I consider him a stage 4 leader. You see, stage 4 leadership is about finishing well. It has much more to do with character than accomplishments. It has much more to do with faithfulness than fame. There was an author that I really liked and respected who recently admitted to a long-term secret affair. And he was in his late 70s when the news broke. And it came with his public announcement of retirement. And when I heard that news, it just broke my heart. I mean, to spend a lifetime leading and to be so close to finishing well, only to fumble on the 1-yard line. And that's the thing. Staying faithful to the end is not guaranteed. It's a choice that you have to make. And I don't care how much experience, how much wisdom or influence you've accrued, you're just as vulnerable as anyone to falling victim to moral failure. And finishing well is all about staying faithful every single day. Whether you're 19 or 90, it's a choice. We're never promised another day. And so the question is, how are you going to use today to stay faithful? The journey to stage 4 leadership is all about choosing to be faithful one day at a time. And personally, the only path I see to that is one where I walk very closely with God. He's my strength, he's my guide, he's my compass. And I know the only way for me personally to finish well is to lean on him every single step of the way. And I want to invite you to go on that journey with me. I don't know if you've ever considered faith as a pillar of leadership, but I'd encourage you to explore it. And it's not going to be easy, but we've got to try, right? We've got to keep fighting that good fight. And maybe if we do, we'll see our leadership serve generation after generation. How amazing would that be? Again, the Leadership Development Workbook includes a list of works that have personally inspired me in this 4th stage to keep fighting the good fight. And I hope that it inspires you as well. But I don't want to leave you hanging without really bringing this home. When I think about my leadership journey up to this point, there are 3 leadership lessons that I learned that got me through stages 1, 2, 3. And these are the same 3 lessons that I'm relying on to make this stage 4 leadership possible. I'm talking about this episode that should pop up right here. I'll also put a link to it in the description for you. Again, if you're serious about leadership, you need to go watch this next. I'm not exaggerating when I say that these 3 lessons changed my life. And it can change your life too. It's a really good discussion. I'll see you over there.